Hey everyone, welcome to the Midpoint. We are discussing with Till today. I think everybody will be excited to hear a little bit more about what his startup does, Zerofy, but also how he got there. It is a topic that is top of mind for everyone. We have been hearing about climate change the last couple of years, I think in the last couple of decades, but it's become extremely front and center in the media, in everybody's mind. Companies talk about sustainability all the time. So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper on what we can actually do to reduce our global sort of carbon footprint, and hopefully Till can help us with that a little bit. Hi, Till. Thanks for joining.
Hi. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for taking your time. So maybe we can start talking a little bit about your background. Sort of, you've lived in many different places. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so professionally, I have a background in machine learning and computer vision, and I started out with a startup in the field, out of university it was around 2007 to 2014. And after I exited that startup, I actually moved to the US, working in big tech for a while for Apple. Moved back to Europe, lived a few years in Estonia, working remotely for another startup that was in the mapping field, and ended up working for Meta/Facebook because that company was acquired, brought me back to Switzerland. So full circle in a way. Been through a few countries and a few companies in that time. Yes.
So we're both Swiss. So I think when it comes to our cultural background, moving abroad is a little bit of a thing. I mean, we're a small country, and a lot of our our friends explore the world by moving, let's say, to Asia or other places of the world. How is that for you when you moved to the US? How is it different from Switzerland? What did you encounter there?
Yes. I mean, it's, of course, US is not like incredibly exotic, quote unquote. But I mean, from a professional perspective, obviously moving to Silicon Valley was just extremely exciting. And I've been there many times before, but living there is obviously a whole other thing because you experience everything, like from your daily life setup to a bit more the culture and how people think. So it's been a really great time. I moved there actually with my wife, and at the time one son, and then over there our second son was born. So we had a lot of experiences, both in professional life, but also in the personal life, and it's been a great experience. Yes.
I mean, I have to ask, like, I think there's this perception that Americans do live a little bit on a bigger foot, literally when it comes to a global footprint as well, sort of carbon footprint. Is that how you perceive it as well, or should we debunk that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably good to look at numbers usually when it comes to these questions versus like, personal perception. And then one, of course, can see if the numbers align with what one perceives personally. I mean, obviously, there are things that are, in the way the infrastructure is set up. The obvious thing is that, people are driving a lot. There's a lot less public transport in the Bay Area as a whole than what we have in Switzerland. I mean, everyone knows this, and it's clearly visible. The houses are built different, they have different type of heating system, things like that. And it's a big country, and of course, people also fly here and there. On the flip side, I have to say the interesting thing about the Silicon Valley area is that people are extremely open-minded and innovative. So it's also the first places where you see a lot of Teslas and so on, right? So it's an interesting mix that I've experienced there.
What do you think could we do better in Switzerland? If you compare, did you pick up anything in the US where you say that's actually better? Yeah.
Yes, compared to the US, yeah. I think especially openness towards technology or like new technologies, moving fast is certainly one of the things that we could do better in Switzerland. I mean, again, like, it's always easy to fall into cliches, but we are still moving generally a bit slower and are a bit careful and a bit hesitant towards new things compared to the Californian, and I would say, because even in the US there are lots of different people, of course. So yeah, I think that's a big difference.
Gotcha.
Or something we could learn. Yeah.
Something we could learn. Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's almost uncomparable just because it's so big. But if afterwards you move to another smaller country in the Baltics, why did you move there, and what got you there?
Yes, it's very personal. So my wife is from Estonia, and then we thought we wanted actually to move back to Europe after the US. Even though I described it very positive and our experience was extremely positive, still we had the feeling, our kids growing up, like we could see that more in Europe, related to school system and other things. It just felt closer. So anyway, we made then the decision to move back to Europe, and then it was the question to go where. And yeah, we just felt, since my wife is from Estonia, we could just try to live there for a little while. I think from the beginning was really meant to be kind of a limited time experience, but still to try it. And I was very curious because I have been to Estonia, of course, before, and I had a very positive, again, impression of the country, also kind of innovative, just obviously very different history than California. And felt it was worth to try this and see how it really is when you live there. Because as I said before, it's always two different things if you go somewhere on vacation or if you actually live there for a while. So yeah, we tried that.
That's amazing. I think there were a lot of startups around the world know Estonia because it's famous for its sort of digital government setup. But it's very easy to create a company within the EU in Estonia, yes. I think, and you can also become an e-citizen, if I'm not wrong. What about sort of the whole sustainability aspect? Is Estonia also doing something in that area?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a mixed bag, I would say. Well, again, partly just my subjective impressions, partly I can also back it up with actual data. But I think Estonia has been more innovative in the digital space than in the let's say green tech space until lately. Lately, I think a lot is happening and coming. But and then actually, funnily, Estonia had done a few things super early on, but then kind of maybe lost track of it. So I give you an example. They had a nationwide EV charging network, must have been around 2008, if I'm not mistaken, or something, or 10, something like that, super early, right? Crazy early. But then if you look around, in terms of EV adoption, just as one example, it's definitely lagging behind nowadays compared even to Switzerland. And people are also generally a bit skeptical, for instance. Another area where they have still a bit of a challenge is the electricity system. They have a very, very big oil shale plant, and it's one of the most polluting in terms of CO2 plants in Europe. At the same time, actually, recently they built out solar massively, which sounds very counterintuitive, but actually per capita, Estonia was in the top 10 or in Europe in the last 2 years or something like that. So again, rough the numbers how I have them in my head. And so it just points to all these things. Yeah, there have been a lot of challenges and so on, and a lot to catch up on, I would say. But recently it seems to be moving, what I perceive. Wind is another thing in energy that for a long time it went very slow, and you would think they have a lot of wind along the Baltics. Why are there not more wind power plants? And now it's actually happening. And then when it comes to the daily life, I think people are just, frankly, it seems busy. People are busy with other things. If I just talk to the average person, same in Switzerland too, but there it's more pronounced that people have oftentimes, it seems, other worries on top of their mind than
that's a good point.
Sustainability topic.
Well, let's get to that. Sort of the people and their the top of mind of them in a moment. Let's start maybe a little bit talking about your startup, Zerofy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just explain what you do and maybe how you started?
Yes. So actually, as I described, I was coming more from the tech side, and I've been working in that field for like the last 15 years or something, I guess. But I had always this secondary interest in like climate and sustainability, and actually for quite a long time. And the history is a bit there. I grew up in a house of scientists. So my dad is a professor in physics, and my mother is also a scientist. So we talked about climate change at the dinner table in the 80s. And, my dad, actually recently I met some old friends from primary school, and they reminded me that my dad had this diesel driving around. Now we know that's also not the solution, but he definitely had a diesel in like 80s, it was super loud and everybody knew, oh, now there is Till's dad coming again. So yeah, we were a bit this nerdy scientist family, and that just means I had an exposure to this topic also for a very long time. And then, always a bit on the back burner, always in the back of my mind. And then recently I thought, okay, I just want to work in this field. And so the other factor is here, Chris, my co-founder, he's actually, by the way, from Estonia. So he's my best Estonian friend, if you like. He has a similar interest, and he has worked in the sustainability field. Actually, the EV charging network I mentioned before, he was one of the persons who built that up in Estonia. And anyway, so we both had this interest. We talked to all our friends, and we just realized that there is always a bit this gap of understanding what technologies are available, what can we already do, gap of understanding where are emissions really happening, and so on. So this just led us to the point saying, okay, we need to build some solution that helps people understand where emissions are happening in their life and how they can reduce them. And that's Zerofy. Zerofy is an app that helps you track your emissions, and by your, I mean your household's emissions, automated and in real time. By tapping into all kinds of digital data streams, from your transportation behavior to your spending and your utilities and so on, and gives you an understanding where is emissions coming from, where are the big levers, and then you can reduce. That's, of course, the second part, which is very important.
So I remember there were these websites, I think they were created by NGOs, at least 10, 15 years ago, where you answer the questionnaire, sort of what car you drive, do you live in a house, how many times do you go on vacations, etc. And then towards the end, it tells you, all right, the way you live, sort of your lifestyle, will need 2.8 Earths for if everybody lived like myself. And if I understand it correctly, you're doing this, but in a lot more granular way with actual data. So not necessarily just asking me questions, but also tapping into the data to show me how big my CO2 emissions are. Is that right?
That's correct. And there's actually two differences I want to point out. That, again, it's based on the real-time data feed that you're kind of getting. It's automated. And the idea is you set it up once, and then you constantly get the updates, and you actually also see the impact of your changes, hopefully over long term. So, and it's also, you don't need to remember okay, how many trips did I take this year in a car roughly, and all those things, which most people probably don't remember, at least I don't. Actually, the other point is also interesting that you mentioned, right, with the 2.3 Earths or 2.8 or whatever came out. I always found this not very helpful. Then because it just gives you kind of a bad conscience in a way, which is maybe good and useful, but it's also kind of hard to act with that information. So you're all right, so I use a lot, and now what, right? And from my perspective, it doesn't even matter so much. Well, to some extent it does, but maybe it doesn't matter so much how you use it. It's more the question, how do you get it down, or how do you get it to almost zero? And I'm actually also just interested in this question, how can you actually do this and still have a good life, right? And so yeah, that's the two areas how it differs probably to these classic carbon calculators that you were just describing.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, there's so many apps in the past that help me track sort of my exercise, track me my work, and in many different ways, just to basically make myself more productive or efficient or healthier. This is something, I think you put it right, like a lot of our existing consumption behavior is not something we proactively do on purpose. So your example, you don't remember how many flights or holidays you took. That's definitely correct, but take it down to how much, I don't know, sort of how much electricity we use. How often do I take the car? Is there some priority in your point of view that for everyone? I mean, if you want to make it actionable or easier for everybody to understand, what are sort of the biggest buckets that we should maybe pay more attention to, or that you in the app pay most attention to because it has the biggest impact?
I mean, of course, it might slightly differ person by person, and I think that's also one aspect is actually to show the user the relative impact of things, and I'll get back to the second part in a minute, but just to go on that tangent, like you read a lot of articles like, okay, like video streaming is bad, right? As an example, for example, like, well, how bad is it really? And then if you see the footprint of your video streaming Netflix subscription in the app compared to like having a burger, like you see the relationship of things, right? And I think that's extremely helpful to see, okay, on an individual basis, like a burger versus a car, burger versus 1 month of video streaming, or like for your life, okay, you know, driving a car versus, you know, my electricity at home versus my spending on, you know, whatever your hobby is, or like meals and consumption. So understanding the relative size of these, I think, is extremely useful. And like, so we don't specifically focus, or like we don't, in the tracking, we don't highlight one thing versus the other. I think it's extremely helpful to see when things happen in the moment also. Like, for instance, if you take a flight and you immediately see it, it just shows you the relation compared to other things. But to your question, when it comes like to the overall, and if you look at the average household and the statistics, about 60% come from the home and transportation for the European household of the emissions. And then like, I think it's about 12 to 15% in average from food. And then the remaining, what was it, like 20% or something are from goods and services and spending. So actually there's a pretty big lever in home energy and transportation. Like you would cover 60% of the average household. Again, like it varies a bit by how people live and so on. But
and what is folded into transportation? Is that flying, cars, trains?
Everything, yes.
Everything,
yeah.
Including my holidays.
Yes.
When I go sort of once a year or twice a year.
As I mean,
gotcha.
Yes. As far as
how big is that part? Oh, compared to like if you could compare like me, let's say, let me give you an example. Let's say I'm thinking about switching from a fueled car to an electric car, but then I still want to keep going on a vacation 3-4 times a year by airplane. Should I rather should I rather keep using my fueled car, knowing that it burns or creates CO2, but the car is already there. I've already invested money, but at the same time, it also took a lot of emissions to create that car and bring that to me, versus just reducing my sort of spend on flights and maybe make 2 vacations where I live or close by. Can you put that into relation, sort of daily transportation versus these leisure actions?
I think it's actually very hard to give just simple black and white answers on these things. And I think, but it's also important to understand these trade-offs, right? I think that's actually an important factor to learn on these things. So, but to play through your specific example, right? I mean, flying is an interesting case because on an individual basis, it's a huge factor, right? You can completely mess up, if you like, your carbon footprint with a few flights per year because like even just the European flight is like one way 300 kilograms, which, you know, you can drive a lot for this actually. And you can eat a lot of burgers for this too. So if you do a lot of like long distance flights, it's certainly bad on your personal footprint. But on the flip side, today, emissions from flights on a global level are 2% or something like that, right? So I think one has to, my view is, I'm not sure if this is correct, but one always has to keep these two things in mind at the same time, like how big is the global impact and how big is like my personal impact. So, because what I'm getting at when you come, for instance, to the transportation sector with cars and so on, there's the opportunity to drive new technologies forward with your decisions, which then help to multiply over a long term, hopefully, the rollout of these technologies. Again, the classic example of an EV, I think it's probably crucial that there was a company like Tesla and then early buyers like paying, like, you know, what I forgot what the Roadster was, but even the Model 3 was like in the beginning $120,000 or something like that. And people had to pay this money, and a big part of it was believing in the future and driving it forward. The important, like the early movers. And I think even still today, if you buy an EV, you help driving economies of scale. If you help buy solar, you help drive, drive economies of scale for solar build out and so on and so forth. So that I think also needs to be factored in besides the individual footprint. And giving a correct, simple answer on this, I think the honest answer from my side, it's impossible to give the right answer. One just has to keep all these things in mind and make the right trade-offs. So yeah. And with your old car, that's also a question. Actually, it depends. We investigate, then we have a blog post on, is it worth buying a new EV or keeping your old diesel? And again, there it depends. If you actually still plan on driving a lot in the next few years, you should buy an EV and as quickly as possible. And ideally, you should even scrap your old car if you can. But like that would be the ultimate thing. But if you are let's say you're retired, you know, you're only going to drive a few more years probably, and you don't drive a lot even. You just drive a few kilometers per year. Per year, that doesn't make sense. But let's say, you know, a few hundred kilometers per year or something, then it's not worth getting a new EV. So it depends again, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
We'll definitely link that blog post in the show notes. That's for sure. Going back to that individual versus, let's say, more holistic view on what has an impact. I feel like for me, what I struggle with is what I as an individual should be doing versus what I expect maybe also the government or companies or, you know, other that have a lot more influence on that larger scale needs to do. So, I mean, what is your view on this? Because in the end, we are, at least in Switzerland and in other democracies, we are voting the people that will make those decisions. So if I don't care about this, I will not necessarily vote people that will change and have so much impact on my life, right?
Yes.
So how do we have that? How can we make that work?
Yes. I think it's a really complex problem, and it's also one of the reasons why I was interested in working on it, like overall, right? I mean, of course, we just do such a small sliver of this whole problem, but specifically the consumer part and like what can the individual do? It's partly obviously also controversial, right? Should the individual do anything? It's all the responsibility of the big companies and the governments, but I think you already kind of hit the nail on the head. It's not. If I understood you right, you said it's like not necessarily one versus the other, because your decision influence like the government, which, as you say, hopefully, luckily in most places somehow are influenced or chosen by people. Similarly, to some extent, even companies, right? I actually think consumers have a lot of power, of course. Not as a single person, but then, you know, if you get some sort of a critical mass, obviously it influences a lot of the other actors too. Yeah.
If you could solve one of the topics in your app, I mean, you're looking at electricity, you're looking at your mobility and so many other things. If you could solve one thing that in your view has the biggest sort of effect, or maybe is the hardest to solve, I don't know what your criteria would be. Which one would that be?
Yes. So I think we should actually focus on like moving fast on what I call like a bit the low-hanging fruits that don't require a massive lifestyle change from people. Because, I mean, it should be just non-controversial that we want to have green energy and green transportation. Personally, I believe you're not missing out on anything if you electrify your home, right? In getting like heat pumps, solar, all those things. If you're a homeowner, of course, but and if you switch to electrified transportation, and I mean, if you have a car, really get an electric car as soon as possible. And if you don't need a car and you can cycle or take the train, even better. But not everybody wants to or can. And these things seem like just should be non-controversial choices. Funny, they're still controversial, but it seems to me it's much easier, for instance, than for most people than changing their eating or like certain of their consumption
perceptions.
patterns.
Yeah,
I think it's really good. Like I think there's also a long-term like trend towards like this. We actually had it in the pre-discussion, but like a simplistic lifestyle, like with fewer things and so on. I think this is partly a natural evolution, I believe, really personally, but it's not something that one can easily force up onto people or like encourage people to do. Whereas I think, again, you can have pretty much an equivalent life as today, but with your home set up with different type of energy and your transportation slightly different. Not a big change, really.
So basically saying, if I got that right, vote the ones that have the most impact for what you stand for, right? And also, if it's either your house or maybe you live in a complex where you need to have some influence and just talk to other people, see how to electrify sort of your surroundings as well to get that removed. Is that a
yes?
maybe?
Yes, and I think the thing we can do is in the places where like Switzerland, for instance, where people are pretty wealthy and so on. Like, there's too much discussion. There was again an article like how profitable a solar plant is, right? Like just. It will be good. It will work. Like, don't worry so much about every single penny because we're really talking about small things there. I know money is important for people. I mean, I don't want to neglect it, but partly the discussion goes too far off into like now it has to be very profitable on top of it, right? But it's quite an easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the thing we should really work towards. The things that are easy to do. Let's just move forward. Let's do it, and on all levels.
I can talk from experience myself. The conversations I have with neighbors and sort of people that are interested, I've put solar on my roof 2 years ago, and now in this situation we're in right now with the energy crisis and soaring prices, it's got a lot more expensive to put solar on your roof because everybody's trying to do it. Especially I think in Germany, sort of a lot of batteries and heat pumps and solar panels have been in high demand. So that makes it even worse, right? When you encounter somebody that is arguing on the return on investment, because it's I think it's a fair point. I think cost overall money is a fair point too, but I think the overall return on investment is something you would usually do on other things, but not your heater. Now, we do that because it's a calculation. You invest money and you want to know whether it's actually saving you costs, and I can confirm from my own experience, it does save you a lot of cost. But in this situation we're in right now, where things become more expensive to build, it might actually be better, and I know this is controversial, maybe not my opinion, just an observation, to make this work again, we could also start to increase the price we pay for electricity that we use from the grid. Yes. Because I can tell that's the calculation everybody makes. So if currently, I don't know how many cents it costs per kilowatt hour in your country, but or in anyone's country, right? Sort of, it depends as well. But if you would start to double or triple that, solar becomes an easy decision very, very quickly. Even batteries would become an easy decision very, very quickly, because the ROI is there, or at least you're spending less than what it will cost you to use somebody else's electricity. Yes. It's just a thought, right? I mean, I guess it's not a solution for everyone, but I can just speak from my own experience with all the conversations I have. It's definitely worth looking into, and my own opinion is, do it not to make money, do it to, if it's a simple amortization after like 10, 15 years and you get to a net zero, don't think and just do it. That would be my recommendation.
That's actually also my view. And I mean, the article I was referring to was also looking, okay, like I think they were calculating with some return of investment of 3% they wanted to have and so on, right? Which is fine. And I also don't want to neglect. I mean, it's like any investment is money you have to have somewhere. And I mean, of course, you don't want to lose money on it. But we're not talking about, situations where you would lose thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of dollars stupidly. Correct. No, it's in the end, it pays off. And it's just a bit the question, how much is the return, or is there a risk that you lose some money, which is probably super low. Like that's what I was referring to mainly. And I'm with you here. Like the flip side is that electricity is actually quite cheap, especially in Switzerland. And it's almost a bit, like schizophrenic in a way, right? On one side, it is too cheap, so it doesn't pay off. And then, and people are not incentivized to save. And are saying, well, is it even worth saving electricity? And of course, when it goes up, then it's no one is happy either, of course.
So maybe one topic that always comes up as well. We talked about the individual. We've talked about sort of involvement of government as of different forces. If you look at it at a global level, I mean, the whole CO2 discussion, emissions, as well as climate change is a global conversation. It affects everyone. We're a tiny country, and a lot of people argue, and not just against solar panels if they don't want to pay for them, but also they argue against the fact that if we do a lot of things, there's still these big countries that are emitting much more than we do. Is it worthwhile to have an invest and focus on ourselves, or should we maybe spend that money better in, let's say, South Africa is currently a big topic in the news, where they struggle with producing electricity and do this with coal. Would that be a better way to use of those investments, or should we just focus on what we can impact quicker? What is your view on
that? So if you look at the numbers, right, in like how an individual or a household's carbon footprint looks like globally, like of course ours here in Switzerland, for example, or in the US or even Estonia that we talked before, is much, much, much higher than the individual carbon footprint in any of these, countries that might be, emerging like economies or something of that sort. So I think it should be really like we should do anything we can to help any other country to reach its climate targets, or actually start investing in the right technologies and leapfrog, if you like, certain things, certain technologies that are whatever fossil based and so on. But I'm very much against, and that's very subjective, like trading this off versus not doing something. Here, I say now, I think ideally we just do both. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I really don't I think oftentimes it comes to the offsetting discussion, of course, indirectly, either on a country level or on a company or personal level. And I think it's good that some of these things are happening, but it's also very slippery slope because very quickly you end up in situations where you're creating the wrong incentives and so on and so forth, right? So I think also coming back to the example before, like investing and driving new technologies, like example, like buying a new Tesla early on, like helps all other economies that are developing and are progressing towards like whatever higher car ownerships or higher house ownership and so on, to make these new technologies cheaper and make them more affordable, for everyone globally. And I think that's what we have to work towards. So I actually think you can possibly even, if we do it right, solve both problems at the same time. But I think it's partly that really I'm very much in favor of investing here first and doing other things on top of it, but not in exchange.
Yeah, gotcha. We've got to bring this soon to a close, but I wanted really to get back not just to Zerofy, but also the way you see sort of your own setup. First, maybe help me understand whether you think you can actually go to net zero just by the measures that you do, or how do you compensate? It's like, I mean, or where are you at per let's say per week or per month in terms of your CO2 kilograms?
Yes, I think overall, we still probably have a fairly high carbon footprint, like compared globally. Of course, it's probably in the 10, 12 tons per year that like is the typical one. But actually, our ground transportation really went down quite a bit because I've been driving EV for a long time, and I also cycle and so on. So this is much smaller. I think our house, actually I have a bit, I can't exactly measure it in a house how we'll get there, but it already has a heat pump. We're putting on solar, so hopefully this should also get better. And then actually when it comes to my spending and consumption and also the flying, I actually have tried to make some careful lifestyle adaptations, like really keeping things in mind or being mindful. So when we go on vacation, I actually try to go more in Europe and actually really going by car, by EV. I found it fun, actually. I started even doing a road trip video once about this. So it's pretty cool. And
how far did you go?
So we just went, for instance, to southern France as an example. And it was a fun road trip. And there's a lot of cool things to do in Europe. So I didn't feel at all I would be missing out on anything. I'm sure we'll fly somewhere again. Like it will happen. Like it's not that we're going super green here, but just trying every now and then see, hey, what are my options? And there's cool stuff. And on eating beef and so on, I try to reduce it actually. And I think it has also health benefits for me. And yeah, it's a personal choice.
As and this is all individual. Like everybody's different view on this. From where to where did you take your beef or meat consumption?
That's actually the meat consumption. So actually beef, I actually don't know where I started because I haven't checked this so well.
You mentioned burgers so many. You mentioned burgers so many times. I guess you started high.
I'm not sure, but actually not. Yeah, but I definitely got a lot more conscious on this. Actually, really just trying to eat more chicken and so on if I eat beef, and also eating less. And one of the funny things is one has to learn how to eat vegetarian. One has to have good options that are tasty and so on, right? And there's more
that's
a
whole other topic, right?
Yes,
on whether or not sausages and milk should be called that way.
Maybe the last thing, consumption is like I try to buy less gadgets, and my wife anyway has been telling I buy too many, and I just try to see what do I really need. I definitely started selling more on like eBay equivalent Ricardo we have here, so it has a second life and things like that. So just some easy things to do.
So that might be the third takeaway. Share your credit card bill with your partner. That way you start buying less stuff.
It's not even the credit card bill, it's just the packages that keep
they keep showing up. Yeah.
No, it's actually much less. But as you know, maybe you're the same. Like I'm just interested in new technology, and then one has a tendency to try a few things and so on.
Yeah, definitely.
I try to do less of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, to bring it back to Zerofy, one way I saw, like, I think I started tracking these over some period of time, and then realized that there's certain emissions that I can't change or will not change, likely will not change. So I saw that you have now, do you allow people to compensate those, not just, how we usually are used to with planting trees somewhere, because I think that's been in the news and gotten a lot of critique as well in the past. I think you partnered up with the company to take that CO2 right out of the air. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Yes. I mean, we as you mentioned, like we don't do the classic offsetting. We try to push carbon removal technologies, and removal really in the sense, okay, it's removed from the air and stored underground, and it hopefully has this long permanence, what it is called, that it's permanently removed, and this what is called additionality that really would not have happened if you would not have done this, right? Which is oftentimes a problem with the classic offsetting project where trees.
So to simplify that, like the way you described it, I wouldn't understand. So where I'm coming from, so basically saying the tree is usually claimed not to be chopped down, although it would have never been chopped down anyway.
Exactly. So this is
Yeah.
this question of the additionality, as it is called, and yeah. Sorry, I'm throwing around these terms, but it's good. Good. Yeah, it would be a podcast topic on its own. But
That's for sure.
we chose. Bottom line is we try to choose things that are really making a difference. So this carbon removal technology, and you may know either direct air capture or what we are using now is a technology called CHARM, where they take biomass, like it's residuals from agriculture production and so on, and they put it through a process which turns it into kind of an oil, and they pump that back underground. So
Oh, wow.
this is what CHARM is doing. And actually, funnily, partly in old oil wells or other places. So effectively, actually, you're taking carbon that's stored in plants and you put it back on the ground. And as far as one knows, it's really quite permanent. So, it will be down there for hundreds or thousands of years. And you can do this. The difference is costly compared to other like offsetting, but I think it sets the right incentives in the way that you say, I try to reduce what I can. And then every now and then I afford to invest into removing something. And again, you're pushing a new technology. They're currently at $600 or so or $700 per ton. And the goal is to land at around 100 or so. So economies of scale, making the process better, early customers help, right? This is the same like with any other technology.
Well, this is super interesting. I think you're right. It's maybe a whole other episode. I fully agree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, it was super interesting to hear what sort of your views, your opinions, and also what Zerofy does. Anyone who's listening, I can only recommend to download the app. We'll definitely put a link in the show notes as well. I've been using it. It's, over time, it's actually, for me, I'm geeking out on this. It's sort of pretty fun to look at the details there. I would also say that if you liked this episode, please follow us, subscribe, and let us know what do you think in the comments. So Till, thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye everyone.